replacing only biomass, but that's not only where it comes into play. It's also going to be in Europe and then other regions of the world, such as Southeast Asia, where coal consumption is only going to be increased, where they have the infrastructure in place. And even if you give them the impact saying that infrastructure does come into place and coal will be used, the coal will be used on a much larger scale than biomass currently is. Even if biomass emits more emissions than coal, like per ounce of biomass, there's going to be more coal consumed than biomass. Next, let's go into our case. So on the coal argument, we already showed you how coal creates not only air pollution like in industrial environments, but it also increases global warming, speeding up the process that's already going on. Next, let's go, and the EU claims the biomass is actually carbon neutral, so therefore coal is a worse alternative to the biomass. Next, let's go into our contention too about like Chinese increased hegemony or influence. So first, they really mainly focus on the debt traps of the argument, saying that China will gain control of these economies just because that China loans the money and they have to pay it back. But actually, once China is more connected with these countries in trade, they're able to take over the markets, leading to more dependency on China. And one of the main ways that they do this is by providing them with coal, because they keep having to be resupplied. There's another reason why coal is bad. Next, let's do some weighing. So first, they give you the impact of how people come out of poverty. We can outweigh that with our coal impacts, showing how that people are actually going to be dying. And just because a country comes into poverty, they say that they will eventually lead to green tech. But the United States, who's been a big developing country for a long time, hasn't widely adopted green tech that they say will be needed to stop climate change. For these reasons, you must negate.
Cool. Are you all ready for grand?
Yeah. You guys can have the first question.
Okay. So how many countries are in the BRI? Like 152,
Yeah,
right?
about that.
So why haven't any of them, like, all of a sudden started dying from coal or had China take over their economy?
Right, so you already show us in your case how the infrastructure projects are weakening as, like, right now while the
Some of
funding
them
is
have
going down.
had China, like, been debt
Wait,
trapped.
so once the BRI fully collapses, what happens to all these projects that are currently being built?
What do you mean?
Do they stay there? Like, is it like half a coal plant that's in Sri Lanka?
I mean, I assume so, because, like, once they run out of funding, they're eventually going to run out of funding, or the project
But
is
if
going
the
to stop.
EU's investing,
As long
wouldn't
as-
that also increase the amount of funding they have to work with? And wouldn't that on net be better for these projects?
No, so...
No, yeah, we're saying that, like, if the EU does join in, the BRI would, like, continue, but we're saying the BRI is bad.
I mean, I don't influence the decision-making of the BRI, but what I would say is that if current projects, like, that are in construction or whatever, would be finished, but no growth would be allowed for the BRI, once funding runs out. Alright, can we have a question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so how long would it actually take for these people to be lifted out of poverty with this increased infrastructure?
I mean, the World Bank doesn't have like a specific number, but I'd say that it's a lot better than not lifting anyone out of poverty, right? No matter how long it takes.
Okay. Alright, do you have a question?
I mean, not really. You can have another one.
Sure. Alright, so when do like the impacts of climate change or environmental devastation outweigh those of decreased poverty?
No, because you don't respond to the weighing that we've literally been extending, so rebuttal, and that's we say that like poverty is going to be a prerequisite to climate change for two reasons. The first is that it gives you the financial capital to innovate in green tech, and the second is that climate change is a lot more severe on the poor. That's the Bailey evidence. It's going to be really critical and final, because he tells you that 98% of the people who are killed in climate change disasters are poor people.
We're saying that the BRI increases poverty.
Well, can you show us?
I mean,
Can you show us how like development actually leads to increased green tech?
Yeah. So
Or
the
doesn't development lead
like
to
we'd
increased
say that like
emissions?
Yeah, just a government having more financial capital or people themselves having financial capital, because we can agree that green tech is probably going to be more expensive than coal is. I'd say that that means that you have a better likelihood of being able and having the ability
Right.
to switch to green
Right,
technology.
but when a country becomes more developed, don't they become more industrialized and therefore more dependent on coal?
I mean, we'd say that like what Caroline explains is that it's like a timeline and fossil fuels have to happen first before green technology can, but we kick biomass, so I don't really know why we're talking about climate change after we already like won the like poverty way.
That's tough.
Okay, we're gonna run the rest of the
54 seconds.
Okay. Okay, so I'll be starting on the affirmative and then moving to the negative and weighing. Is everybody ready? Great. Remember what Jane Gray tells you in summary, that the BRI is declining now, and that's why you've seen a 92.5% decrease in investment in Africa. We say that the EU revitalizes this investment by backing domestic investors. Companies want to invest in African infrastructure right now, but they can't because they don't have the legal backing to do so. The BRI is the only way to provide that, and that actually creates the infrastructure, as Susanna says, that will lead to a 67% higher chance of getting out of poverty, and that's why the World Bank concludes that under the BRI, 32 million people will be lifted out of poverty. They make one argument about the BRI won't create effective infrastructure. But first, that evidence doesn't say that it's going to be under EU oversight. We would say that EU oversight makes the infrastructure more effective and also increases the funding for it. And then we would say just roads being there creates a 67% higher rate of getting out of poverty. That's the cleanest place to vote. But then on their case, on coal, fossil fuel is the only way to A, develop nations by allowing them to actually get out of energy poverty, and to B, allow the transition to green tech by actually revitalizing their economy to allow investments. The affirmative world is the only way where you solve for the effects of climate change. And then on debt traps, remember, we tell you that the EU oversight will prevent Chinese hegemony from taking over by allowing a more democratized view of the world and actually allowing these countries to develop with it. And then we say we would outweigh, because you can increase revenue when poverty is alleviated, to A, fight climate change, and then B, to actually relieve the debt that even if you believe that China would put on these countries. Then secondly, we would say that Bailey says that 98% of those killed by climate change are people in poverty. So affirming is the only way to actually mitigate the effects of climate change and to solve the lives of 32 million people and get them out of poverty. For these reasons, I urge you to affirm.
49 seconds, Brett.
We'll use it.
So I'm just gonna
kind of just go over like a general overview of the debate and go over the motion board arguments. Is everybody ready? Awesome. Okay. So what this debate has come down to pretty much is proving who can solve poverty in the best way. But we're saying on our case that by increasing the BRI, you increase the debt traps on developing and even other countries. You're going to see that so far, even in the BRI, in the past, certain countries such as Pakistan and other countries have already had to default on their debt, which has decreased their economies. And obviously, if a country's economy decreases, especially a developing one, you're going to increase the poverty in that country. So, but then moving on to their case, you're going to see on their link into decreasing poverty is in kind of an increase in infrastructure. But if you respond to this first, and the main one that we're going to extend is that the projects, a lot of them aren't actually being used, the Sri Lanka example I gave you in rebuttal, that it is actually the least used airport in the world, and it was built by the BRI, and there are other examples that aren't being used very much at all. So you're going to see that mitigates their link into poverty a lot. But then also their impact part that they read you about 32 million people being out of poverty. From that same article, later in the article, it says in a direct quote, the cost for a lot of countries, the cost of the BRI may outweigh the gains. That's from the same article. So you're going to see that in some countries, you're going to see that people won't actually be lifted out of poverty. But then also you're going to see they keep saying they keep saying the infrastructure would increase, therefore decreasing poverty. But again, that's not true, because the countries that are being infrastructure built in have to pay China for that infrastructure. And you can look to our case that increases their debt and also Chinese influence on those countries, which is bad. So you're going to see we link into poverty better, therefore we mitigate the impacts of climate change, and most importantly improve the quality of life of millions and even hundreds of millions of people.